Hello, hello, hello. I am here with the Miss Monique Perez. She is the organizer, the TEDx organizer of TEDx Gramercy. Or did I say that right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
correct. Yes.
Awesome. So I'm really glad we actually have the chance to talk here and get to pick your brain and share kind of what goes on the behind the scenes of being a TEDx organizer. And you got a really interesting story that I didn't hear everything about because I do
Mhm.
like to hear
Surprise,
hear
surprise.
yeah, exactly. Hear the surprises that come up as we have these kind of conversations. But I'll let you introduce yourself and we'll go from there, all right?
Sure. Yeah, I think you've done a pretty good job so far. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm Monique Perez, organized TEDx Gramercy, and very happy to be part of the whole TEDx community and happy to contribute in any way I can to speakers, to the community, or anyone interested in TEDx.
That's awesome. So I think first question I'll ask you that might be a point of clarification for a lot of people here.
Mhm.
Where is TEDx Gramercy? Is Gramercy a country that we don't know about? Is it a city we don't know about? Is it a state that we're not aware of in the US
Uh,
somewhere? Or
That's a great question because even in New York, maybe some people might be questioning themselves, like, where is Gramercy? What is Gramercy? I actually took over the license. There was a great group of organizers who did it for a couple of years. And my colleague Costa, he posted on my school board that he was looking for someone to replace him on the license. So the Gramercy is located right by Flatiron area, Chelsea, East Village. So in Manhattan, it's a very, very small area, like just a couple blocks. The history, I would not necessarily say that it has like a very rich history. So let's just say I took over the license and then I learned a lot about Gramercy, and I delivered TEDx Gramercy. And the event was hosted at Baruch College, which is located in Gramercy District.
gotcha, okay. And so what was your, kind of picking into your personal journey? How did you get there? I know you and I chatted a little bit before, but
Mhm.
you're not originally from Gramercy. It sounds like you went on a long journey from where you're originally from, and I won't spoil it, I'll let you deliver that, but from there to state to state to state to, finally ending up in New York and delivering TEDx Gramercy and organizing it there.
Yeah, so I guess I am a little different because I'm not even originally from here. I'm not from this country. So I was born and raised in Brazil, lived in Brazil until I was 19. Been here for 18 years now, and I've lived in different states: Massachusetts, Illinois, Texas, and then I ended up in New York. Uh, and when I heard about TEDx, I actually had no idea what the X was. I had no idea what TEDx was. I was like, oh, I know what TED is. So then I went really from finding out what TEDx was, what it took to organize an event, to be an organizer, and everything. So it was really a huge roller coaster for me, like a road to discovery. And I feel like many people who hear about TEDx, they don't know what it takes to organize one. So to me, it was a little bit overwhelming in the beginning. I applied for the license and then I just had like a deadline. I was like, I have to do this. Put a team together and choose the venue and curate the event and connect with other organizers to learn what their approach was when it comes to finding the right speakers and whatnot. So yeah, so there was a lot.
And we definitely will touch on that because I think that is super, super interesting as well. Just kind of the journey from your perspective and your side of things, and then the
Hmm.
speaker side of things, and kind of what it
Yeah,
looks like on both sides.
yeah.
But for you mentioned something. You mentioned when you first heard about TED and TED Talks, you had no idea what TEDx was. And I was the same way. I thought they were the
Hmm.
same thing, and
Yeah,
I didn't know the difference until you know, long enough, right? And just kind of figured it out.
yeah.
But if for those that are listening right now, what would you say is TEDx versus TED? Are they different? How are they different? Are they not
Um,
different?
so I think one way to simplify, and I was like, oh, now I see the difference, is You think about TED, and everyone thinks about, the big conference and the big names, Bill Gates or whatnot, big stage, beautiful, amazing. So what happened was, for many years, people started going to the conference and they had such an amazing time, and they just kept like asking, like, I wish you could do that. So after hearing like there's a need here, so they decided to issue licenses. So there are different types of licenses that it allows you to organize a TED-like event, but it's independently organized. So when you think about TED, they have the conference in Vancouver, but they have all their sponsors, right? So they have all the money to support them. But when it comes to organizers and organizing a TEDx, you need to figure out ways that you can raise funds to organize the whole event and cover all the costs. Make it creative, and think about the community and whatnot. But also there are a lot of limitations on who you can reach out to, who can get involved in the process of organizing an event. And basically, not everyone, but as much as we can, we try to do a volunteer based. So organizers and the majority of people involved are not paid unless we have sponsors and we can pay for services. So we did pay for some services, but as far as the organizers who end up wearing a lot of hats, we don't get paid. We get paid in different ways. Like, to me, the way I got paid was just on the day of the event, seeing that we sold out, and it was like we did. It was like the event happened, so it was an amazing opportunity. But yeah, so when I say, like, in my case, like, full disclosure, I put my own savings down to do it. I was like, I believe in this, I'm gonna do it. And every time I say, people are like, what? They're like, are you crazy? And when I talk to other organizers, they're like, yeah, I made that mistake initially too. So, but anyway, it happened. So,
And so what is that from the TEDx organizer's perspective? What does that journey look like as far as raising the funds to actually put the talk on, finding the sponsors, and all of that kind of stuff?
yeah, so that part, like, when I connected to other organizers, they all said that, one of the hardest part was really raising the funds. So I didn't know anything about raising funds. I was like, okay, how do I get sponsorships? And then I learned about different timelines and who to reach out to, when to reach out to. And in many ways, like, we ended up organizing the event in about 3 months. So we had 3 months to come up with all the speakers and the venue and pay for everything. So it was like, and we had 10 speakers. Yeah. So, and I was mostly just coaching them through the end. But it was challenging because if you don't get sponsorship, you rely on ticket sales. So the goal is to make it more inclusive, right? You want people to come and hopefully not have to charge for the ticket. And there's a maximum that you can charge for the tickets. And unfortunately, in our case, we had to charge the maximum to cover the basic costs. And you're not allowed to make a profit. So, like, whatever, if there's money left, we use towards other events. But we just, like, what's the biggest cost? The venue, video, and whatnot. So we just needed, like, we did with very limited resources, and we did what we could. So, like, if sometimes you see that a video is not that amazing or something like that, just think a budget. Yeah.
And what is the maximum ticket cost that TEDx, or
a
is it
hundred
TED or
bucks.
$100? Okay. And when we talk about these regulations, is it TED the organization that is giving the regulations, or is it the
Yeah.
TEDx holding branch of all the TEDx licensees?
So TED is the one who gives out the licenses, right? So if
Okay.
you want to apply, you have to go through TED. But there are different types of licenses, and different types means different regulations.
Right. Okay.
And for example, like, I wanted to have more than 100 people, but I can't unless, like, I have to organize my first event. So I did, and the maximum I could have was 100 people and charge maximum $100. So, and that money I need to cover all the costs.
Right.
So we did what we could. So we did that, and once everything is done for the first event, then there are certain events that you need to attend in order to qualify for audience of over 100 people. So, and there are very limited events. So like this year there was only, I believe, TED Women and the TED conference. So if you don't, let's say, if you don't have sponsors and if you can't afford to go to a TED conference, which could be like, I don't know, $15,000 or something, then you don't qualify. So you have to keep doing like different types of events, like up to 100 people. So yeah.
And how much money would you say is and I don't know how the conversations you've had with other TEDx organizers, but in your experience and through those conversations you've had with them, what would you say is on average how much a TEDx organizer needs to raise from sponsors in order to deliver the TEDx talk event that they envision and they dream of, right?
So now I have a little better idea, because in the beginning I also had no idea. Like I was like, oh, we are in Manhattan, so everything is gonna be absurd, you know. And this was right when all the events were really coming back, right, in New
Okay.
York. So I was like, is there room for negotiation there on the pricing, you know? And so I was like, I'm sure the venue, it's gonna cost like $20,000. So it really depends on where you are and the venue and everything else. Like you can get creative, but you need to keep in mind that you're gonna have to record, and that talk is gonna have to sound good on YouTube. So I don't know. I guess a safe number. If I were to put a safe number, ooh, there are no limitations. But I think it can do a good event with like $40,000-$50,000. Yeah.
Okay. And then for the timeline of needing to raise that 40 to 50, I know you said you were really crunched because you had 3 months, which is very impressive that you could put together an entire TEDx event, finding the speakers, finding the video editors, finding the videographers, the cameramen, finding the venue, all within 3 months. And
Yeah.
then, which we haven't even touched on, training and coaching the speakers that don't have a ton of speaking experience, if they didn't, to be ready for that talk. I mean, that's very impressive. I know how much
But
work it takes.
but
So what
listen,
does that look like?
yeah. So even if you do get speakers who have a lot of experience, from my experience, right, working with the speakers, I had to be, because of time. I was like, let me reach out within my network. So I knew some people. I was like, oh, let's see if they're interested and whatnot. And they all had public speaking. The majority of them had public speaking experience. But what they weren't aware is that TED has a lot of limitations as to how you can or what you can share, right? Because you can work for like one of the big corporations, but you're used to talking about your product
Hmm.
in your company. But when it comes to TED, it's not about promotion. You're talking about your idea,
Hmm.
right? So let's say you work for Google, you cannot talk about Google, So it's
Right.
like, okay, what's your idea, So what I learned from working with the speakers was that they were pretty nervous because they felt so limited, because every time they were like, I was like, okay, talk. And then I was like, no, not good. Stop.
Hmm.
Let's restart. So yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, you did. And I think it also leads me to another question, which I'm curious about. How do you, as a TEDx organizer, deal with those limitations that are put on the speakers as far as, what they can say and can't say when they're spreading their idea?
Mm, I I try my best to stick to the rules, because there's always a risk that your talk is not going to be published. And
Yeah,
my
that's the scary
goal,
risk. Yeah,
yeah,
it,
so
it has
my
to be the
goal,
worst feeling as an organizer to
yeah,
put the entire thing together, find the speaker, train them, and then they slip up, and then you say, oh no, I'm sorry, we weren't able to post your talk. That's the worst
yeah,
feeling as an organizer.
yeah. No, and some people are getting a little frustrated with me. I was like, I trust me, it's not me. Like I'm talking on behalf of TED, but you have to understand that what TED is limiting, it makes sense. It makes sense. They're not here to promote your business. They're here to share your idea. So that's the whole reason behind it all. So sometimes I when I was like very like no no no, they were really mad. I was like, it's not me, but I want to make sure that your talk is published. So luckily we did have 9 out of 10 who was published. The only one that wasn't published was because the speaker requested not to publish their talk, and that's something that I was also like, what do I do?
Mm.
But I respected their decision. I was like, okay, fine. So yeah, so yeah, that happened.
And then for you, that's how did you go about? I know you kind of touched on it before, but
Mm-hmm.
picking those speakers, you had 3 months, which
Mm-hmm.
I know for the first one I gave, it was applications were in at the end of March. Your decision was made if you're part of it by middle of April. Then
Mm-hmm.
from middle of April until the first week of June, that was when it was training and putting everything together. So it was
Uh,
seemingly
so
crunched.
yeah, so basically, like I was in school last year, so it was like end of the semester. I was like, I don't have time to deal with this, but I got the license, I believe, in March, and I was like, I can't. So I really started like putting myself in June, and the event was in October. So like yeah, so kind of that was my timeline. And for the speakers, at first we opened up an application on our website, and as soon as we did, I think in less than 48 hours we got almost 100 applications. And I was like, okay, stop.
Mm.
Stop. I was like, this is not working. And some people were just like, one of the questions was, why would you want to give a talk, TED talk? They were like, oh, because I've always wanted to. So I get the idea that a lot of people are, they like, my dream is to give a TED talk. It's like my bucket list, but it's not simple. It's not simple because when I ask people, okay, what's your idea? We're spreading then. Share your idea. I talk to people like, okay, what's your idea? And then they get stuck. I was like, okay, work on it and then we'll talk again. Because when I feel like you're just sharing something because you're trying to, let's say I'm starting a business and I want to focus on promoting my business, then to me it's already like, no. So that's just my decision. But
That's really interesting. That actually, a lot of people have asked me that question. I think it's your answer would be fantastic. After seeing all those applications that came through,
uh-huh.
what tips do you have for people that are looking to give TED Talks or TEDx
Mm-hmm.
Talks, excuse me?
Mm-hmm.
And I do slip up on that a lot. I use them kind of synonymously, and I find myself catching
Uh-huh.
myself on it all the time. But for the
Yeah.
person that's looking to give one and sees an application link and they choose to apply, what tips do you have for that person to make sure their application actually stands out and actually holds a chance of being accepted?
So here's my take. Of all the applications, we chose one person to be a speaker. And I chose him because I was like, I think I can work with this person. Because I went and I did a research on him, his content, and the stuff that he shares, and I was like, okay, let me see if I can work with him. So I worked on their idea. Initially they had one idea, and I was like, I don't know if this can work. Can you work with this? So we worked on their idea. So they were open to it, and they knew what TEDx was. So what I learned, and I don't know what to say to you when it comes to the application, because I've decided not to do applications anymore, because to me it just doesn't work. I think in my approach now, it's more like I'm gonna be watching you. And if I see something, or if you come and talk to me and I listen to your idea, I'm gonna write you down as potential speaker. Because I did, even though like at the moment I'm not organizing one, I'm going to next year, but I've been connecting with possible speakers to see who could be a good fit. So that's my approach. So like some people choose basically like on their zip code, whatever name their event is, and that's like their thing, and you're allowed to do that. I'm open. I had a speaker coming from California, one from Texas, but yeah. So
I just saw your shirt. I noticed you have the TEDx Gramercy shirt on. I
yes.
hadn't seen that yet. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's hiding. I'm proud.
And I love it. And so you actually bring up an interesting question that I have. And I think from my experience, I notice it's different for every TEDx organizer. I think it's a decision that the organizer makes.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize this until I started, getting into the TEDx world. But for every TEDx talk, is it a personal decision of the organizer to choose to accept people from outside the location of that actual TEDx talk? For example, you seems like you were okay taking someone from California when you were based in Manhattan. So what does that kind of look like for you?
So I'll be honest, like that's something that it was tough for me because again, it goes to budget. It goes back to budget because a lot of the decisions go back to budget. So that's why like this year I was like trying to connect. I was like, let me see if I can make some connections to see if I can get sponsorship. Because if I have sponsorship, like we are limited as to how we can spend the money we raise. So one of the things that we can cover is like travel expenses, right? But if we don't have the budget, then like you're gonna have to find a way to come here. So I actually had people like from London and from other places in Europe who were reaching out and they wanted to come and speak. I was like, I'm sorry, but I can't pay. And they were willing to come because they see the value in delivering a TEDx, right? But I was like, no, like yeah. So that was to me. I think right now, depending on how much we raise for the next event, I may just make that rule of if you can't get here yourself, I'm just gonna choose local. And but it doesn't mean that it's only about the, let's say, Gramercy, right? So for example, I know Kenneth, who you met from TEDx Harlem. His rule is everyone has to be from Harlem, and I respect that. That's great. Like he's really supporting the community, giving a space. That's amazing. But to me, I'm open to listening to ideas.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think that brings me to another question, which is how do you go about deciding which ideas are ideas worth spreading?
It depends on the event. So, like for example, the next event, my approach will also be a little different when it comes to choosing, let's say, the theme, right? Because depending on the type of event, you are limited as to the topics or that you can have. So it can't be, for example, a lot of the applications we received online, it was about mental health. So we couldn't have just one theme like mental health and all the talks about mental health, and it's the same thing. But can you imagine like you're going to an event, it's just around that. There are events, let's say TEDx Salon, which is a smaller one. It can be like a weekly or monthly event. Then we can have just one topic. Okay, let's talk about mental health. Great. But it has to be a variety from different topics, industries, and whatnot. So it's very hard. You have to understand that it's very hard to have something unique because there are thousands of the talks out there. So like when we did TEDx, we had 10 talks and they were all different, but maybe some sort of overlapped a little because it's just really hard. But
Mm.
yeah, it seems like mental health is something that people, organizational psychology and that kind of thing, it's something,
Mm.
a very common topic for people to talk about. And yeah, so that's why we're like, we can't, it's great, but it's just, we can't have the same thing.
Right. Do you This actually is really intriguing to me. Do you wait until the applications are in before
Mm-hmm.
deciding the theme, or do you decide the theme and then request for the applications to come in? And then
So
is that an individual decision, or is that a mass rule for TEDx Talks, or is it a decision that every organizer makes themselves?
it's a decision every organizer makes. Ultimately, that's the person who has to make the final decision. because we are in charge of it, right? If they say something that they are not allowed to, there's like copyright, everything that we have to follow. So yeah, so we do have to choose in the end. I brought in my team and I was like, hey, what do you think? These are like the decisions that we've made so far. I wanted to include the team. So that's one of the criteria. But when it comes to the theme, my approach the last time was thinking about a theme that we could include a variety of topics. So our theme was dare to be different. So like my whole idea, like thinking behind, was like thinking about like the pandemic. We were just really like coming back, and during the pandemic a lot of people were like really daring, like, oh, I'm gonna quit my job, or I was fired, okay, let me go and find my dream. And you're daring in a lot of ways, right? So that's kind of like, okay, so you have an idea and you're risking, so you're being daring. So that's kind of like, what is it that you did or you're doing that it could be related to that, or to make a difference. So that was my approach last time. But recently I was reading like, oh, how can I do better, right? So now there are also two things. One, I could pick the topics and then choose the theme based on the topics, variety of topics, because it has to be a variety. But that could also mean like, depending on the theme, it also kind of dictates the kind of sponsors that you're gonna get in some.
Mm.
That's like just an insider.
That's interesting. The
Yeah.
theme can not only dictate the speakers, but therefore dictates the sponsors that are willing to fund your
Yeah.
talk. Interesting. I wasn't aware of that. That makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense,
but
though.
but think about it. Like, if you have one that is more like towards, let's say, Harlem had one that was like a black noir metaverse, I think.
Mhm.
So that's more like inclined to the tech, right?
Right.
So you're more likely to get some companies to sponsor your event, or in the tech industry. So I was like, oh, interesting, but I didn't know. So
Mm.
yeah,
Lesson learned. Always learning, right? I think that's
yeah,
important.
yeah.
And then what guidance do you have for the, and you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but
Mm-hmm.
it'd be awesome to dive into it. What guidance do you have for the business owner or the entrepreneur or the professional speaker that has a business around what he's speaking on or she's speaking on, playing that balance of how do they get a TED talk while keeping their business out of it, and how do they really secure their spot on that stage
Mm-hmm.
with the idea at the forefront of what they're speaking on and putting the business on the back burner, and then how do they get value from it as a business owner when they speak as an individual about an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a lot to unpack there, so feel free to ask me
Yeah.
any clarifying questions about that, but I'm curious
It,
what your thoughts are.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I work with small businesses as a business advisor, and this is something I often talk with my clients, because people are thinking, oh, promotion, and I want to start my business and I want to promote and I want to make money, and that's their whole idea. I was like, okay, but why? Why are you doing this? So that's why, like, as a speaker, you need to think, great, TEDx is a great opportunity. If I get picked, you're it's not that there's something wrong with your business. It's not that. It's just that, think about the why you're doing. Like, you're starting your business because you have a passion. What's that passion? So you don't have to talk about your business like, oh, this is my business, this is how I work. Like, oh, you're telling a story, right? And you also need to think about the audience. Like, would someone like to hear my story? Like, the why I'm doing this. And also think about not just your story, but what Tad wants is like, what does your idea have to do with local, national and global? So, like, for everyone who's listening, because anyone could listen. It's the audience that it's on that day of the event, and it's those people who are searching for similar ideas on YouTube or on TED. Think about when you're looking for inspiration. So, kind of like, remove yourself a little, from your business, and think about the main idea and the why you think that's important. Why should people be listening to you?
Hmm. That for my second TEDx talk, It sounds like that's kind of what it hit on. Was I had a business at the time, which was a student co-living incubator for students to, be more conscious about who they choose as their roommates, choosing the 5 people they spend the most time around at the time in their life that they normally experience the most personal development. And of course, there was a business behind it, but the concept that functioned and built a business,
Mm-hmm.
anybody could replicate. And me coming from and delivering that TEDx talk was, hey, we have a business that does this. It was only in Madrid, Spain, but the concept anybody can use. So we want to get on this stage to share this concept so anybody can do this when they're a college student and they want to, leverage that opportunity that they have. And it
Mm-hmm.
seemed like in that case, that core concept of the business functioned as an idea worth spreading, even though we didn't make any money from it as a business because we shut down the business the year after, just because we kind of had moved on from that. It's, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of entrepreneurs that know that kind of progression.
Yeah.
What would you say you want potential speakers to know? Which, by the way, fantastic answer. At least I found it valuable to the last question you delivered, because I know a lot of business owners have that desire to give a TEDx talk, but then want it to use to promote their business and realize that them marketing it to promote their business is what's getting them not accepted. And there's just not a lot of clarity around that for them. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to these speakers that they have a fantastic story, that you hear them and you talk to them and you meet them, maybe you're just having a coffee with them and you realize, oh my gosh, your story has an idea behind it that is so strong. It's almost hurting people for you not to be brave enough or courageous enough to get up on the TEDx stage to share your story and change so many lives. I want you to give this TEDx talk. What do you tell that person that knows they have a story that can really change a lot of lives or impact a
Mm-hmm.
lot of lives, but they're scared and they don't have clarity on how, the application process, and that they just have that I guess that Mount Everest vision of giving a TEDx talk, but they know they have a story and an idea. What would you tell that person?
I would say they need to read the book about Ted. Even I was like, you know what? Let me read about this because I'm not like I I don't think I'm the kind of person who would be looking to be a speaker. I prefer working behind the scenes. But reading the book on Chris Anderson, it was very eye opening for me on how to structure your talk and how to deliver a speech. Many people get very scared about being on stage and talking, but you know, I think one of the things that he mentions in the book is it's about storytelling, right? But it doesn't have to be like so personal, but conversational. Like you're sharing your idea, and if you have like a creative way of delivering that, think about you don't have to think about the audience at home. You're talking to those who are in front of you, and you're just sharing your story. And I would say work with your organizer so they can help you. And like I said, we had someone from the application that he had a completely different idea, and then I was like, I think you can do more with that. So we just sat down and we talked about it, and he talked about his insecurities, of how to speak and his story. I was like, you can touch on that. So that's what, like, I work with them to kind of like, why don't you speak about that? Because it's something that maybe people can just listen and kind of like walk away, thinking about it. So I
Mm.
know my answer is like very open,
That's
but
good. That's the point.
but that's also another thing that I see a lot of TEDx organizers say. Read the book, do your homework,
Mm.
and yeah.
And then for, I've talked to a few people that have mentioned this. Said, well, I want to give a TEDx talk, but I don't have a script written, so I can't do it. What do you tell those people? Do they need a script to apply? Do they need a script to show the organizer to get that spot on the stage?
Hmm. No, no. So we had one speaker who was holding his notes. It's okay. I'm not saying you can't do that. If you feel like you do better, then so be it. But you can practice your speech, your script, but on a day, I think it's important for you to really practice. Like it's hard for me to be like you need to rehearse, you need to practice. Have a script, but you don't have to necessarily stick to it. Because one thing, practice in front of audience, but it can be like your family, your friends. I need to practice, and this also helps a lot. So that's also another thing that I can tell people. Try to practice in front of other audience. And the script or no script, like usually, I don't know, like we've had some people who gets nervous and they're just reading. What do you call the when you have like a screen in front of you and you're reading?
Uh, the teleprompter, I think they call it.
Yes, teleprompter. Like we didn't have one, but I've been to TEDx events where they had it, and the speaker was absolutely nervous, and they were just so stuck on reading. I think I was like, "Oh, your idea is so good," but they got so nervous and so stuck to it that they even made comments that are not allowed on TED.
Mm,
So there's a lot of editing there too. So
sure.
yeah.
And do you? So I know with my the first TEDx talk that I gave, I was accepted on the idea, and then
Mm-hmm.
I was paired with volunteers that were helping actually write the script. Then
Mm-hmm.
once I had worked with them and it was good in their eyes, then they sent it to TEDx to say, give the green light to say, hey, yeah, you can go speak on our stage with this talk. Like it doesn't break any regulations.
Mm-hmm.
You're good to speak. Is that the normal, I guess, system or process of TEDx talks, or was that
It's a,
just the
it's
one they?
possible you can do that. I didn't do that. I was the one reviewing it because I was, the organizer, the main organizer, and the licensee. So I had to read, and that was my homework to them. Like I needed to write, and then I scheduled a call, and I was like, I want you to practice. And some of them, not some, we only had, I think, two who had given a TEDx before, or one, I don't know. I think one was very familiar. The other one, she said, oh, I didn't do this before. I was like, yeah, but you're doing it now. Because that's just something that other organizers had told me, like, wow, you should just schedule like a rehearsal, and then we did the rehearsal on the day of the event. But I think it's important. And one thing, I don't know if our organizers do, but one thing I want to do next is have a schedule and take it seriously, because people are just like, oh, I've been given the opportunity to speak at a TEDx. Make sure that you're ready to give your TEDx talk. And I want a schedule on like deliverables. So you're gonna have homework, like here's what I want you to give me a draft of your talk. Then we're gonna go over it. If there's anything, I want you to, work on it, and then we're gonna have rehearsals. And it's gonna have to be that way to make sure that on a day everything works smoothly and the talk is great, because they need to think about the after, right? It could be that your talk goes viral. We don't know. It's out of our control. So
Mm.
yeah.
And then I know you said you worked with a lot of people that were already speakers.
Mm-hmm.
What was the one thing that those speakers that already had plenty of experience
Mm-hmm.
at speaking on stage needed
Mm-hmm.
the most coaching on for you and your team to coach them on? Was it the pauses, the tonality, the stand on the red dot, which I know is a unique thing to TEDx talks?
Uh-huh.
What would you say was that thing that they needed the most help with to deliver the best TEDx talk possible?
I don't think it was really like about, let's say, them being on stage, but it was more on what they were allowed to share.
Mm.
Because the majority of them, like, oh no, I'm used to speaking in front of crowds and whatnot. But then, like, one of them even came to me and he was like, oh, I've won whatever awards. And I was like, huh, okay, tell me more. And then on the day of the event, I was like, oh, aren't you bringing anyone? Like, he was like, no, 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 I'm not bringing anyone because I'm so nervous. I didn't sleep the past 2 nights because this has been the hardest thing in my life. I was like,
Wow.
but I thought you had awards. I'm like, you know. But yeah, so their talk was great, but that's something that some of them shared, that they were struggling with the limitations, Because think about it, like if you're used to speaking freely about your ideas, and then you have someone limiting, it's kind of like you don't have a lot of freedom of speech, right? Because it's a neutral territory. It
Um,
can't be a me versus them. It can't be like political. Like you can talk about politics, but it can't be like, this side versus that side, and this is better than the other. So yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people struggle, like speaking, often speaking about something, then you get that right taken away.
yeah, I think that is really interesting. That is very, very interesting. And I notice a lot of the TEDx organizers I speak to, they say normally it's two things. One
Mm-hmm.
they struggle with, and then one the speakers struggle with, which
Mm-hmm.
the first one is what they struggle with, which is similar to what you mentioned, is getting the funds, finding the sponsors to actually do the event. Because it doesn't
Yeah.
seem like there's a set system of how to do that. It's kind of just, hey, Monique, figure it out. Bon suerte.
Yeah.
Good luck. You got this.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is the limitations for the speakers that you're mentioning, because I know I talked to one that was I'm not going to say her name, but she was a TEDx organizer of a TEDx in California,
Mm-hmm.
and she said one of her TEDx speakers actually spoke about addiction,
Yeah.
and that one wasn't allowed to be uploaded to the TEDx YouTube channel. And that was really hard for her to tell that speakers, hey, sorry, they're not allowing this one to be uploaded. So it's normally one of those two problems or opportunities, whatever your perspective is on those things.
Yeah.
But I find that very interesting that you mentioned that in particular.
Yeah, we had someone wanting to speak about something similar, and I was like, kind of like, I felt sorry because I wanted to give the opportunity, but at the same time, it's you have to be very careful on how you deliver. So yeah, yeah, kind of have to stay neutral.
Yeah, I think the TEDx. This thought just came to my head. They need like an artificial intelligence language model that can analyze the talks and transcribe it and figure out if it goes with their qualifications and regulations or not. That way, they don't have to spend hours and hours doing that.
Sure,
Just
I'm
an
not
idea.
against that. I'm not against
Yeah.
that. You can you can do it, but ultimately, you're still gonna have a human making the final decision.
Right. And
Yeah,
that's powerful. Yeah.
and
Well, I
Ted,
know.
Ted is always very much on top of it. I'll tell you that.
Mm,
So
right. I know we only scheduled this for 30 minutes, but we got almost 15 minutes over here. So I think it just speaks to the conversation, right? Is
yes.
there any last things that you want to say here on this recording here?
I mean, I think I've said quite enough, and I would say just one thing though, like, for speakers and based on my experience as well. Like, if you're given the opportunity to speak at a TEDx, kind of don't take it for granted. Just be a team player as well. So if you're if the organizer needs some support, do your best to also support the organizer, because the benefit is mostly for the speaker. But the behind the scenes, it's a lot of work to put the event. So just, yeah. And as far as speaking and whatnot, I think I gave pretty good points, maybe.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, for all different kinds of speakers. I know there's all different kinds, from the aspiring speaker that's just starting, that knows they have an idea worth spreading in them,
Hmm.
or needs a little push to help them realize they actually have an idea worth spreading in them, which I
Yeah.
do genuinely believe every
Yeah.
single person does have a TEDx idea in them,
Yeah.
all the way through to the professional speaker, to the business owner that is doing speaking to leverage their business, and then
Yeah.
everything in between, right? So I think that you deliver value to all of them, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And you don't have to be like a C-suit. You can be just someone who, I don't know, you're doing something amazing in your community, or you have an idea, like you're a painter, but you're also a software engineer, and you did, I don't know, like anything creative, like
Mm.
share something and be creative on stage, entertain us.
Well, there we
We need
go.
that.
Thank you, Monique, and I
Yeah.
think you provide a lot of value to everyone listening here. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
taking the time to record and wrap it up here.
All right. Awesome. Happy to be here.
Obrigado.